So everybody, welcome to our monthly webinar. And hopefully you realize we today are talking about how to use learning and talent data to transform engagement. So a couple of the things, because you're going to get way more. We try to always over deliver, but a couple of the things we're going to cover today is how to navigate engagement in a virtual world. Like, wow, it was difficult in 2019, and this took on a whole nother level. We're going to be talking about how to find and interpret your data in order to drive engagement, so you're making informed decisions, and also how the employee engagement lifecycle will help you understand what data you actually need. So you can see the illustration on the screen, of course, and this is a lot of what we're hearing about how people feel about this topic, Chris. So I love the choice of this. So Chris
Yeah,
Bond,
I just
CEO of
wonder how many
Bluewater.
people are out there doing exactly what this guy's doing and just stirring the pile up until it starts to look right. I know there's a lot of people that are out there that do that from time to time, but boy, it's tough. It's tough to figure out how to use that right data. We're going to work on simplifying that today.
I love it. Well, that is definitely simplify has become one of my favorite words in the recent years, especially this year. So I'm super excited for everybody to hear where you're going to lead us today. So without further ado, let's dive in.
All right, excellent. Well, welcome everybody. We're so glad to be here in our November webinar talking about how to use learning and talent data to transform engagement with employees. Now, when we look at employee engagement, I know we've got a poll up and y'all keep answering the questions on the poll. But when we look at engagement driven with employees has changed dramatically over the last 9 to 10 months. So much of our organizations and our businesses were in offices in January and February. And we did have remote employees, but there was a design there in how they interact and engage. But now COVID hits and it begins to change. And through that period of time, we've also collected a tremendous amount of data. But is that data now beneficial? Is it really helping us begin to look at how we engage employees? How does that information benefit not only the organization, a learning and development department, HR, the business, but especially managers? And so today I want to take you through a little bit here and begin to talk about where we're collecting data, what those points are, why they're critical, and then how that feeds into an engagement model that's going to be able to help you really begin to think about transformation inside your business. Then we're going to give you some really quick tips and tricks about things you can do now to drive further employee engagement, especially inside your learning and talent technology. So as we go through today, as Dacia talked about, please post questions in chat. Make sure that this is interactive. It'll be more valuable for each one of us as we go through that. Because otherwise you just get to listen to me talking for the next 50 minutes. And as we look at this, I want your questions, your engagement. So let's go ahead and get started and dive in a little bit to what we're talking about here in terms of engagement. So first things first is let's talk about employee experience and in the employee experience lifecycle. Now, we've shown this before on webinars, but it's really important to us because the process of engaging employees, and right now I'm going to specifically focus on some technology pieces, starts with your talent acquisition system. There has to be a great experience inside that talent acquisition as you're recruiting in order to start the employee off well. But as you're beginning that recruiting process, you're gathering loads and loads of information and data about individuals that may be a part of your company. And so we want to be mindful of what data we collect and how does that interact with the future of the employee's experience. The next piece is onboarding. So now we've made the decision that we want to hire an individual and we want to go onboard them into the process or integrate them into our company. And as we go through that onboarding process, it's not just let's go fill out all the requisite government forms, but onboarding also is a learning experience. It's a teaching experience. It's an immersion experience. It's where we should be driving the initial employee engagement to a point that we validate for that brand new employee. This is why I came to work for this company. So in recruiting, we're gathering a lot of background information about what happened, what their career history is, what their interests might be. When we onboard them, we're introducing them to a job and a role. And we want to begin to gather information and data about career path. All of these activities drive employee engagement. Now they're inside the company and they're working for us. We have to manage those employees through the process of working inside the company. How do they know what to do? They have never been with us before. We need to really pull them into a process of understanding interactions, relationships, job duties, role responsibilities, all of that information that happens in the managed process. But this is also the location where we're able to gather information about feedback. We're able to set goals. We're able to go look at skills and competencies and those things that we can evaluate and assess in a way that, again, it collects more and more information that allows us to drive forward with employee engagement. Next step is pay. Everybody wants to get paid. And this is a point of technology where we see a lot of activity because people want to go look at their paychecks. I want to go look at my benefits. I want to look at my contribution to a 401k. Do I have my deductions set right? So there's a lot of opportunity to engage and pay. I'm always very cautious about recommending that data is used in employee engagement because of privacy rules and regulations, especially if you're in Europe around GDPR. But there's still a level of engagement that we have between the employee and the pay cycles and their interaction with the company. Now, the next piece is my favorite, which is all about development. How are we taking all the information that we've gathered from recruiting, from onboarding and managing, and beginning to turn that into a career path and a career program for each individual in the organization? There is no better way to engage employees than to actually look at them from a point of view of future career pathing and future development. And if we do that, we're going to collect even more and more information. So what are their competencies? What are their aptitudes? What are the capabilities that they've developed? How are they doing in the development cycle? They may discover that they're heading down one path as one type of engineer, but they want to alter that path because they've got aptitude and competency and feel more successful in a different line. Again, this is all information that's really driving back to that employee engagement. And after we've developed them for a while, we want to put them in a position to promote them, to actually move them throughout the organization, to give career advancements, to give opportunities that are going to help drive forward not only the organization, but the individual as well. And then we start all over again with a recruiting process because we're recruiting for another job inside the organization. We're gathering more information and we're gathering more data. As we do this and we gather that data, we need to look at where it's going to be meaningful and who really needs the information. It's great that the business has the information, and that's fantastic, but who's going to have the greatest impact on what we're doing? So the greatest impact on what we're doing is really going to come between the relationship between a manager and an employee. It's vital that we begin to do a better and better job as a learning and development and a learning and talent industry, as an HR industry, in providing information and data for the manager in order to be able to engage the employee. We can put all the tools, the systems, the tips, the tricks in place, but if we don't have a model that allows for a manager to engage an employee accurately, then we're going to begin to struggle. We're going to have more and more difficult time with that employee engagement. Now, I'm going to give you an example from one of a group that I worked with a number of years ago, where their big struggle was that they were only retaining 38% of all new hires within the first year after their hire. So that means 62% of these individuals were leaving the organization. Why? Low engagement. Their managers did not have information to help them look at a career path and look at development. They were just focused on task level, getting a job done. And as we are changing in this COVID world, post-COVID world, remote work world, changing business world, all those elements, we really have to look at leaders inside the business and say that the engagement of employees is the most critical investment that we should be making. And if the most critical investment that we should be making is the engagement employees, then the first employees we need to engage and invest in absolutely has to be managers. Now, we showed you on the previous slide, and I'll pull up another slide that's got multiple pieces here together. But when we look at this and we look at the information that the business has, the information that HR has, feeding that information and data back to the manager so they can drive employee engagement becomes critical. Now, we had a great question come in actually ahead of the webinar. So for those individuals that submitted questions ahead of the webinar to allow us to prep a little bit and talk, fantastic. Fortunately, you hit on a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, and that's about models for engagement with managers. So my belief is that as a business, we've got to provide a lot of flexibility. So we provide guidelines and tools around how a manager should be engaging and interacting, but not so restrictive as that there's one path or one profile for engagement. On the other side, we don't need to make it a free-for-all and just say, hey, Dacia, go engage and interact with your employees, and here's some information. We've got to begin to spend more time training managers in what engagement looks like and providing them the skills and tools to be able to adapt to how a manager and an employee will actually work together in order to drive that engagement with specific activities in mind. We really want to always focus on how do we use data to drive career development? How do we use data to understand gaps that an individual may have in the skills they need to actually do a job? There is a big level of satisfaction that can be attained if we just know that maybe Chris has a gap here or there, and if the skills that I could develop actually help me be a better employee, I'm going to be more satisfied in my job. So there's a difference between career development and skill development. Skill, let me do the tasks on the job, but let me also focus on what that career is, on my interests and level of activity.
And
The
Chris,
number one thing that we're hearing from CEOs right now is that we're hearing that they're looking for more mobility inside the organization. They want more opportunities for managers and employees alike to be able to move in and out of the organization, to develop different skills, to be able to drive the business forward. And that's the focus of the future, is how do we begin to upskill everybody and use the data and information we have in order to drive that forward and provide a greater level of interactivity and engagement.
and it's interesting, so maybe I'm saying the obvious, but I just kind of want to clarify and ask if you've seen this. So obviously you're talking about tooling up the manager to support the employee, but also by doing that, do you see that it also increases engagement at that manager level as well as the mobility? I mean, is it a virtuous cycle, or, or am I just stating the obvious? What are you seeing?
No, absolutely. Look, the majority in a lot of our organizations, a lot of the managers are the ones that are left behind. So what happens is that you've got an organization, and then we go pick out 10 to 15% of the organization. They're going to be part of this great leadership development program, but we may be leaving hundreds and thousands of managers behind without any engagement or training, yet we expect them to go do a phenomenal job of driving our business forward. there is no one more important to the employee than their direct supervisor or manager. That's who we really need to engage with. So to your question, Dacia, yes, when we begin to see a process and a path where the manager is elevated in terms of the level of interaction and engagement, they in turn turn that around and share that with others. I mean, it's just kind of the same model of, let's go treat somebody like we want to be treated. And then once they experience that treatment, then they're going to go out and treat somebody like they want to be treated. And it's this human nature and this trickle effect that begins to happen and begins to be infectious because we're making the investment in the manager first. And then that really helps us with all of the frontline employees.
Yeah, absolutely. Bennett just posted some of the polling results. And so I think it's super appropriate to read those. Employee
Yep.
engagement, no surprise there, extremely important to almost 70% of our participants.
Yep.
And apparently you are preaching to the choir, because the good news is that they're also saying manager engagement is extremely important to their organizations as well.
Very good. Yep. I love that. And then poll question number 3 gets into interest in adjusting workflows and activities. I think that we really have to look at this in a way that we need to adjust and adapt to the manager community, to the supervisor community inside our organization. And so this is incredibly encouraging that a lot of people are out there considering this, 68% saying it's extremely important to engage the manager. The question is, do we have information and data available that we can provide to our managers that allow them to be able to engage? And I believe that we absolutely do. And most of the time, managers don't have access to that information. They have a limited view. And we'll see a lot of organizations that'll go in and build big dashboards and reports. And those big dashboards and reports are for executives, or they may be for an employee. But the only thing that we're providing to a manager might be, hey, who's completed their compliance training and who hasn't completed their compliance training? Who's completed their performance review and who hasn't completed their performance review? That's a very limited view of information as a manager. As a manager, I want to see, what are the interests? What are the capabilities of somebody who's working for me? Where are there places that I need to encourage them? Where are there places that I need to guide them? Maybe I'm missing or have a gap in my ability to encourage or guide them, and I need a little bit of extra training or support in order to be able to do that. But I don't know that I need to do that for the employee unless somebody's providing me information about where that's really going to drive them forward.
Love it.
So now we look at all of this, and the gathering of data is going to be very, very unique to each organization. So what I'd like to take you through here just for a moment is to think about, how do we present information to managers? We've got to do it in a very, very simplified way. We've got to do it in a way that we're actually engaging the manager in a workflow or a process that's going to be unique to them. And so the third question we had is, what's your level of an interest in adjusting workflows inside your learning and your talent management system? So great to see that between very interested and somewhat interested, we've got about 3/4 of the population of people participating in this webinar that have a real interest in that. And so it brings up the big question that we're going to ask today, is what can we do today to actually drive impact on the business? Some of the philosophical things that I've just talked about, there's a lot of data, a lot of information that we're going to drive forward to be able to get that data, to be able to help. It's going to take us a little while to get there. But if we're super focused on manager and employee engagement based on your responses, that's a really significant issue. Then we need to look at, how do we make changes today? What can we do today to improve incrementally? Because those incremental changes can then begin to drive just phenomenal long-term changes as well. And we're beginning to see that through the ability to go modify workflows and the user experience inside learning and talent systems in a way that helps us go drive the capture of more data, but have a much higher satisfaction level with managers and employees inside the system.
I love it. And I think this is the perfect time to introduce our guest. I love that you suggested that they come on and really give that point of view from the user experience team. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guests. So Klaus and Kelsey, if you guys wouldn't mind showing yourselves, coming off of mute. Kelsey Rice and Klaus Anenby are joining us today from our user experience team. So welcome, you guys. Thanks so much for hopping on.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
What prompted you to have them join us today? Because I love the focus on today, what people can do today.
Yeah, for me, the changes that we're seeing requested in user experience environments and workflows are really doing a tremendous job in trying to help businesses adapt to what they believe the future is like. And I think bringing Kelsey and Klaus on really because of their experience is going to allow us to share some stories and some information with everybody that's really going to help us provide some value back to you and give you some ideas about things that you might be able to change or do or work on to drive things forward in the future. Great. So I'm going to start off. And so now, Daisy, I get to play you. And I get to ask Kelsey and Klaus questions. So the first question is kind of the big one. And Kelsey, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Why are we seeing organizations really begin to look more and more at making changes in their overall user experience inside learning and talent systems?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. So I'd say, with some of our most recent clients, we're definitely seeing a bigger towards user-driven learning. But it's kind of twofold. So, they want to make it easy for their employees to access and complete their mandatory training, but they also want that relationship between the user and the LMS to go beyond that. They want users to continue coming back to the LMS to learn more on their own and complete some of that non-mandatory training. Another big push we're seeing with our clients is them wanting to offer a more collaborative learning experience for their employees. As you mentioned earlier with COVID, there was obviously a decrease in that face-to-face training. So employers are wanting to use their LMS to help bridge that gap between the face-to-face and the virtual training. And they still want to provide their learners with that collaborative experience. They're also wanting to make the transition as easy as possible. So they're looking for a way to provide, a one-stop shop for these training programs, that employees would typically be completing in person. They're looking for a way to convert that in-person experience to a virtual experience while still being able to reach the same objectives. Another thing I'd say that we're seeing a lot of is, clients wanting a system that's easy to use and allows for users to easily access the things that they need. So that's nothing new, but it's something that will always be important. They want their employees to be able to access everything they need from one place. If a user's constantly hitting roadblocks in the system, they're likely to just drop off. So, employers are wanting to make sure that the system is easy to use to help drive user adoption and really keep employees coming back.
So Kelsey, that's really interesting. One of the things that kind of sticks with me from one of your comments is about trying to get users to come and learners to keep coming back into the system. Mm-hmm. And I assume what you're saying there is really more self-service than, hey, I'm going to assign you this learning, but we want them to be encouraged by the ease of use in the system versus required to come into the system.
Exactly.
Did I get that right?
Yes, we want them to want to come into the system and explore and see more, and not just get in there and, be confused, give up, and get out as soon as they're done with their mandatory training.
So are there 2 or 3 items inside that user experience that you're seeing pretty consistently from clients that they're trying to adjust or simplify? What are some of those areas?
So I'd say as far as, what they're trying to simplify, is just having kind of everything, right there on one landing page as soon as the user logs on. So the user can see not only their mandatory training, but they can also see the range of learning objects that are available to them. So, they get in, they log on, and they're, they see, oh, I have this to do, but then they can maybe see there's a carousel, of featured courses underneath that they know that they can come back to, and it kind of piques their interest. Also just, really reducing the amount of text on the screen and really just trying to focus on, putting what we're trying to drive users to on the screen.
Great. So Klaus, I'm going to bring you into this part of the conversation as well, because just in some of the things that Kelsey's talking about here, I mean, clearly this shift in user experience, simplification, providing more availability with an ease of use to more and more learning content becomes critical. I mean, what type of things are you seeing from your clients as well in regard to that type of shift and change in user experience?
Yeah, it's a good question, and quite often the projects that I'm involved in, have been involved in for a while, the implementation themselves are seen to be a quite large or quite big endeavor, part of a bigger journey, if you will, and the initial parts of the implementation is obviously to get all the different pieces together so that we can start to use the system. But for some reason, I believe that quite often the user experience of it all is perhaps left to a later phase. So it's always quite often revisited. And there are requests on how do I find? I cannot find what I'm searching for. And even the pages that are being displayed are quite often being quite noisy, if you understand my meaning, within the system.
Mm-hmm.
And especially within Cornerstone, which is the solution I'm mainly working on. It's a software as a service, so you can do certain adjustments, but only to a point, right? So you cannot do out of the box customizations, which could have been the old way of doing it. And what I've seen now is that it's a much more bigger shift in a drive towards changing those pages that we could not change before, because it has either too much noise in them, there are too much of information that just confuses the managers and the users, so that they get lost. They don't know where to find things, and they once they get lost and they try a couple of times, they get a little bit agitated, and then the entire user experience is perhaps not what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And so by using a technology, we are able to remove that noise, to remove unnecessary information that isn't really vital for that process to function, or for the manager and the user to find and search for that information, and only make the most important information available, and perhaps bring it up a little bit in terms of size, and also not removing any information is sometimes also quite important, but also to add information that just isn't there. So one example would be that we did add a very nice piece of graphics into a succession planning task. If we would have done it the standard way, we would have added a lot of text into the description of the task, which would have required the manager to scroll down quite far into getting the different assessments ready. So what we did there was simply we put nice buttons on top of the page, and the manager would then click on those pages, and a nice modal window or window on top of the screen would appear not requiring the manager to scroll, not requiring the manager to go to another page to find out what he or she needed to understand in order to make the right assessment. So those kind of things, and it might seem a little bit trivial at some time that we want to remove and want to add a little bit of flavor or more information to the page. But when I've spoken to clients after we've done those implementation, that they sort of said that made the world, because now the managers we're hitting the pain points they had before, and now they can progress without those pain points, and it's those pain points that really makes a lot of change sometimes.
So Kelsey, that's great, Klaus. So Kelsey, what Klaus is talking about, simplification and impact, and it just made me want to come back and ask you the question. So with some of our clients, what are some of the business impacts that you've seen by making that our clients have experienced from making changes inside user experience? There's an obvious one for the employee, but what about for the business?
So one thing that just comes to mind as we were talking about kind of ease of use and simplifying everything, is that we're seeing a lower number of those support calls. And if a system's easier to use, obviously people are going to be making less of those tier 1 support calls, asking, where do I find this? How do I access that? And what this really results in is less wasted time for the people who are having to answer those calls, and tell people all day where they go to find their transcript. Whenever they're doing that, it doesn't leave them much time to do the tasks that they need to do for their job. So that's definitely something big that we're seeing. And then on the employee side, just more of that, increased user satisfaction and adoption. If the page or the system is easy to navigate, and they know where to go to find things, they're going to be more likely to return and continue using the system.
And it sounds like
totally
from a business objective, that's you said that a couple of times. It seems like that's really important to organizations, is how do we make this simpler for the user so they'll keep coming back? We
Right.
want them to keep learning. We want them to keep growing and developing. That's great. I love that reduction in time on especially in level 1 help desk support, and we know from a lot of administrators we work with the amount of time that they're spending in answering questions about, hey, how do I log into the LMS, or how do I actually find a course, is a big time waster. So that's a really great point.
Yep.
So Klaus, just coming back over to you and thinking about this, and we begin to dive into that business impact for some of your clients as well. Can you give us a couple of examples of just small little things or tweaks that you may have made in a user experience that had a significant impact on a client?
Sure. So I'm sure, do you want to share the slides?
Yeah,
because we do have a couple of them.
For that, then we can go dive right into that.
Excellent. Because what we're going to look at here is, quite frankly, I mean, the examples here can be seen as simple in a way. So what we're looking at right now is in Cornerstone, it's the universal profile. And the story here was that managers could not find the complete form, which lies under that button, which is called ... And it was a lot of cases towards support from managers unable to find how to submit a form on behalf of an employee, of a direct report, or on behalf of themselves even. So what we did was that we came up with a solution in using a technology called Google Tag Manager, and if you go to the next slide, we put the button directly on the page. So now there's a complete form button, and we also renamed the ... button to options so that we can easily refer to that if it's required. But what this meant for the client was that their manager's voice were heard a little bit in terms of what they really needed, because this was a client who were using self-service forms to a large degree or large extent. So this meant that the bottleneck that they had in terms of cases and issues were no longer existing. And it's sometimes those small little details that can really make a lot of difference.
That's great. So Kelsey, when we look at this, I mean, this seems like just a really simple change in the process. But where are some of the places that we're seeing organizations get a little confused, or maybe they're focused on the wrong thing, and then in terms of user experience, it just can be made much more simple. So because sometimes more information is less valuable, but I'm just looking for those places where we're seeing people get distracted and they miss the opportunity to do simple things like what Klaus is talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we actually had a case. We were working on what we call a social learning dashboard for one of our clients, and it's basically a one-stop shop for a training program where the learners in the program can access training, see their progress, communicate with other members of the training program. And, you know, we ran into an issue where they would navigate away from the dashboard to, you know, a learning details page or something if they wanted to start a course. And we didn't have a way to get them back to the dashboard easily. So we actually were able to use Google Tag Manager very similarly to add a button that would take learners directly back to that dashboard from those other system pages to, you know, really make that experience seamless for that training program. You know, we've also noticed sometimes it's just really little things. You know, labels really matter. And the language of the business should be reflected in the language of the user interface. So, you know, you're going to get a lot of those, again, tier 1 support calls if something that you typically call an assessment is now being called a review. So, you know, we always recommend to just clean up the language of the navigation, or, you know, just keep it consistent with the language of your business. Another classic mistake some organizations make is that they tend to overload users with extra information. You know, they think the more information, the better. They'll be able to figure it out. You know, they'll find what they need. But, you know, you're actually kind of doing a disservice to your users when you do that. The most successful pages or experiences are often centered around, you know, prioritizing the goals for the business and the user. You know, if there are some clear objectives you want users to do often, and I think Klaus kind of, you know, alluded to this earlier, you know, you want to make sure that's really big and really apparent and easy to process. So a better experience really is offering more simplicity in a lot of places, and, you know, sometimes less information that they have to sift through, because that tends to frustrate our users.
That's great.
Absolutely.
So Klaus, yeah. we actually have a question from Samuel Hillard, and the question is, in fact, if Samuel, you don't mind me reading, he says, "Whoa, Google Tag Manager can change buttons?" Question mark.
Yep, you can.
Why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So what Google Tag Manager is essentially, it's a way to, well, first of all, you're able to do a lot more and extend from and go above and beyond from Cornerstone solution in terms of Google Analytics. You can do a lot more tracking and analytics data. But what it is, it's literally an integration between Google Tag Manager and the Cornerstone solution, which means that the Google Tag Manager will lie as a visual layer on top of Cornerstone, meaning that you're able to inject code snippets, CSS or JavaScript or HTML, to literally any page within the solution. And this can seem to be a little bit dangerous, and there is a potential, but when it's used in the right way and with care, it really helps to bridge those disconnects that we were talking about before, that the manager could sometimes experience, and also the end users, so that we get that really good user experience going. So that's really in a nutshell what it is. And Google Tag Manager, it's a Google product, and it has its own user interface, so you're able to maintain and manage your code snippets in a very very controlled manner. So what we're looking at, if you move to the next slide, I can show you another example. And this is actually a work in progress. And on this slide, where you see it's a certification, the employee has just been assigned a certification. And me personally, I think that this page is looking a little bit outdated, and this spans across the entire screen, and I will have to navigate my eyes across the entire screen to understand what I'm supposed to do and where to find things. And quite frankly, I think it's a little bit busy, if you get my drift. And this is still something that we are working on. And so the current proposal that we have, and this probably will change a bit, is that we have changed this page using Google Tag Manager. And if you go to the next slide, please. Mm-hmm. We're looking into a version of the same page, but it's a little bit more condensed, and we have removed a little bit more information, and we just centralized and made the focus on this should be on the center of the page. It shouldn't be across the entire screen, and this will then be affected for all the certification, so it will adhere to a similar look and feel. And it's still a little bit of a draft work in progress, but the point is that what we're doing here is that we're making things easier by changing the visual layer of the solution.
Great.
Another, yeah, sorry, if you want me to go on to the next page.
We can do that.
This is actually a client who went live with this. So what are we looking at? We're looking at the career site of a client and it's both in English and in Danish, and they are about to create their career profile. So typically this would be a candidate who has applied for a job at this company and is going to create this profile. But what we needed to do here is to have a little bit of a pop-up, a confirmation box appear on the screen, informing the user about the GDPR rules. So here, the login confirmation is being adjusted or added via Google Tag Manager, informing the user that by logging in, you need to be made aware of these rules around storing data. And that's what was required by this client. So we used Google Tag Manager to simply add a modal window which appears, and when they then click on Create Profile, they are being taken forward. And sometimes this is where the little bits and pieces we get into sometimes using a solution like Cornerstone, which is a software as a service, and you're able to make adjustments, but to a certain degree. You cannot configure it all, but with Google Tag Manager, there is a great possibility in fixing those areas that perhaps before we couldn't do.
That's great. And I love this, especially on this example, it aligns with Kelsey, one of the things you said about using the language of the business to be able to make changes. And we see in a lot of learning and talent management systems where the language of the application is the language of the application, not the language of the business. And that becomes confusing for users. So love how this is all coming together as well. Excellent. Great. Yeah. So very, very nice. So we'll stop the share there, and and go to a couple more questions that we have in the chat. And one question from Jennifer, and Jennifer, I'll paraphrase a little bit, is, are we seeing a positive impact on learners doing more self-directed learning in those user experience environments that have been simplified? So Kelsey and Klaus, I'll put that out to both of y'all to see what y'all think.
I would say absolutely, yeah. Because imagine if you know what you're about to do, and the last time you did it, it took, I don't know, 5, 6, 10 clicks sometimes. But with the ease of some workflows and simplifying the user interface and navigation, it perhaps only takes 2. And being aware of that, I has made a lot of the clients and users sort of being more positive around what they're about to go into doing when it comes to going out into the solution.
Yep, I completely agree, and that kind of brings me back to a point I made earlier. Having it so whenever a user logs in, they not only see the training they have to do, but they can see the training that's being promoted that they may want to do, and it's right there. They don't have to navigate anywhere else to find it. We saw that a lot with companies during the Black Lives Matter movement. They wanted to promote diversity and inclusion training, and they were able to add those things directly to their welcome page as an optional training, but not necessarily something that you had to do. And they were getting a lot of hits on those trainings.
That's great. So even moment in time changes become very important, is what I just heard you say, Kelsey. So it's a moment in time, a change, something that we want to focus on. Being able to adapt and move quickly in that environment in order to encourage behavior becomes really important.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to cheat a little bit because I've heard some side conversations, but when you guys are looking, whether at user engagement or the data aspect of this, do you ever see people focus on the wrong thing, or maybe things that are misleading to what actually engages users or actually drives employee engagement?
I do sometimes, yeah, and it has to probably do, to me, my experience would be that the knowledge around what the system can do and can deliver without the need of going through such technologies such as Google Tag Manager to customize a little bit of the user interface, if you will, is where I tend to sort of believe that you should always strive towards extending or making the most out of the standard solution and standard configuration and capabilities around it. But and then look forward or look towards using any customization as a next step from there. But yeah, I think sometimes. Or what do you think, Kelsey?
Yeah, no, I'd completely agree with that, Klaus. You read my mind on it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know in the years that I've been around learning and talent groups, we always want to provide more information, right? So it's not enough to say, here's a course, and if you're looking at this as a career path or a role, you really ought to investigate this course. Make it really simple on the front end. And so you've showed, and we've talked about some examples of that today, but then we want to add in more information. Well, this is a great course and it's for this job role, but let me put a nice long description around the course. And then let me connect all the other different points of information and metadata and activities that could be associated with the course. And now we've got this really long list, or like the page that you were showing, Klaus, and now it's a really wide, and I got to scroll this way and I got to scroll that way. And now we've got an individual learner who becomes confused and said, this is way too much information. And, my head's going to explode emoji comes up, and they begin to think this isn't it, as opposed to how do we really look at this as a model of communication and change that as a business encourages individuals to go take action. And I think that's what I've heard from both of you during the conversation today is we want to make it simple so it encourages action, and it encourages somebody to come back, and it encourages them to take action again, because the more that they're in learning and developing and growing themselves, the more that's going to benefit the individual and the business as well.
Yep.
Love it.
That's
Okay,
fantastic.
well, that pretty much brings us to the top of the hour. So thank you guys so much for investing this time in our audience and, you know, in the leaders out there that are trying to make a huge difference in the lives of individuals and, of course, their ability to impact the business. So thank you so much. Everyone, we appreciate you. Remember, you're doing such critical, important work. I mean, this is how people can maximize their impact. And so just thank you so much for your work, for your commitment, and everything that you guys do. Stay tuned. This is a monthly, so we are going to be diving into skills gap and skills development in the coming months. And so very exciting. So make sure to watch your inboxes, and also make sure to follow us on LinkedIn. There is a lot of behind the scenes stuff, a lot of thought leadership, a lot of stories about how other people are solving the exact kind of challenges and questions that you guys have. So pro tip, follow on LinkedIn, connect with us, and please send us your questions. We will see all of you guys next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.